It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by Ray White, the largest real estate and property group in Australasia.
And welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Podcast. We're talking to Veronica Morgan from Good Deeds Property Buyers. Welcome to the Real Estate Podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Hey, Veronica, you're a buyer's agent and you help people buy their dream homes. But in this current climate, that's easier said than done. There's a lot of stress, I think it would be fair to say, out there in these suburbs as people try and navigate their way around the property ladder. Why is it, do you think, a bit of a challenge at the moment to buy in this market?
This is the first time in my over 20 years property experience where pretty much every market across the country is booming. And so it's hard to buy because there's the perception of not a lot of stock. And even when there are listings coming on, they're getting snapped up so quickly that, as I said, it's the perception there's nothing to buy. So when buyers look around, they see prices going up month on month. And this is, one of the rare times as well where a lot of the regional areas have been going up at a greater rate than even Sydney and Melbourne, which have, traditionally been the powerhouse markets in Australia. So when you've got all of that going on around you, it's really uncomfortable for buyers, because they feel the pressure to make decisions quickly. They obviously worry that they're not going to be able to afford to buy what they want. They have this sort of sense that there must be this hidden market out there that they're not tapping into and they've got no idea it exists and how to get access to it. So, there's just a huge proportion of people that are out there wanting to upgrade in particular at the moment. And they're looking around thinking, am I being locked out of this? And so there's a high degree of discomfort and that's not pleasant for anyone really.
And location is always top of mind for people when sitting down and evaluating where they want to invest in. And people can be out of the market for even up to 2 years because they don't want to settle in a location that isn't their preferred choice. There has to be this realignment really in people's thinking based on their budget and their location. And I'm guessing that you are the person in many ways that has to illuminate the reality of truth for them.
Well, it's funny you say that. I mean, one of my other hats, I wear a number of hats, right? One of my other hats is actually the co-founder of Home Buyer Academy. And so that's where we predominantly help first home buyers, but also investors, particularly first time investors. And, that number one question we get asked particularly from first home buyers and from first time investors is, where should I buy? And as a result, we even created 2 workshops. We've got a where to buy workshop for owner occupiers and a where to buy workshop for investors, because it's an enormous question. Now, owner-occupiers tend to be the ones that will hold off because they can't get in their desired location, and they will make lots of mistakes because what they're failing to do is recognise the realities of their situation. We don't like reality checks when the information is not necessarily what we want to hear. So we talk about the 3 Ps that you've got to go through a process to actually work out which can flex most, either the price, that's your budget, the property itself, so the actually elements and features of that property, or the 3rd P is the position of the location. So owner-occupiers need to go through that process and they need to go through it early on to get clarity as to what they should be buying, what they need to be spending and where they can afford to buy that. And the longer they take, the worse off they are. And it's fine if the market's falling, take your time. But, in a situation we've had in recent times, the market's been rising. And if you actually wait too long, you're priced out of the market. It's actually worse off. And so it's a real trap. And I remember the last boom in Sydney between 2012 and 2017, we'd get people coming into our office that had sold, wanting to upgrade, not realising the market was moving as fast as it was and taking, up to 2 years. The worst case was 4 years. But, it wasn't unusual to see people that had spent a year or 2 years looking because they really hadn't got their head around what it was that they needed to come to grips with, in terms of buying their next property. And on the investor side of things, one of the reasons that they might delay is because the sheer overwhelm of, well, it's a big country. Where's the best place to invest? And there's so much information out there, but there's so little clarity around, well, which bit of it matters? How do I actually apply that information so that I make good decisions? And unfortunately, in property, everybody's got an opinion. And so it's really difficult to get unbiased advice and direction. So that's one of the reasons why a lot of investors would spin their wheels, particularly when trying to find a location to invest in.
You know, what you're talking about there, it's like trying to catch a Sydney train, but you're 2 hours late to the station.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty miserable, isn't it? You might end up somewhere else. You just got to get on the next train. But the problem is that that's not always the answer for everyone, but I think it's a great analogy.
And properties at first glance, this is the other problem, can have that snob factor from the buyer, meaning that they look at a property and automatically dismiss it because they can't see the potential, even if it's in the right location or just one suburb over. And I'm guessing, again, this is going to be the job for you to put the clarity, the opportunity forward so that they're looking through the opportunity through a different lens.
Well, it's sort of funny, that there are so many television shows encouraging people to renovate, and it becomes a fad every now and then where people want to renovate. But fundamentally, it's so much easier if it's all done for you. And so, I keep saying to a lot of clients, black taps will not be in forever. They'll go inside and they'll fall for all the most, the up-to-date finishes. And like you say, fail to see the opportunity in other properties. And I love looking for ugly ducklings where the bones are good, but it doesn't have all the shiny, new finishes that are really on trend. And the problem is, of course, on the other end of that scale, if people are going to update property, they do need to understand what's the difference between something that requires cosmetic updating versus a full-scale renovation. And often in a hot market, people, they get desperate, and particularly if they decide that location is their number one thing and they can't move from that location, they will make compromises in order to stay in that location. And one of those compromises can be that they do decide to go for the ugly duckling. And that's great if it's got the bones. But the problem is that if they don't understand the cost of renovating, the local council, what they're likely to get approved, all of those sort of different elements does make it very challenging. And so what you often see in a hot market, those unrenovated properties in really top locations often rise in price disproportionately to the cost of renovating them. So it's sort of a double-edged sword, that one.
So the word FOMO, it's a term that we didn't know about until recent times. And with FOMO, as you say, it can cost the purchaser more money, firstly with the purchase price, and then, as you say, with the reno, if it requires a reno. And sometimes they've encountered this hot market and the FOMO is just costing them more and more money.
FOMO is a very, very dangerous thing. Our emotions guide so much of what we do, and FOMO is sort of like a part of social proof. It's loss aversion. There's all these sort of behavioral biases that we respond to when we're buying property. And of course, when we look around and we think we're going to miss out, then obviously we start getting desperate and start making massive compromises on the property that we may not have previously if we were feeling less stressed. Made and tend to overpay as well. And this is one of the things a lot of buyers have to remember. Markets go around in cycles. What we're experiencing right now won't last forever. There will be a downturn, and then there will be an upturn again, and then there'll be a downturn. And, sometimes they're short, sometimes they're long, but fundamentally, and in solid locations, that trajectory over time is generally upwards, but it's not a smooth ride. And this is the thing, that when buyers are in a particular market experiencing those market conditions, they don't actually know what it's like to be in a different type of market. It's a bit like in the middle of summer. You can't imagine being freezing cold in winter. So it's only back in end of 2017, 2018, where there was another acronym called FONGO, fear of not getting out. It's not that long ago. And this is what I try to remind people when they're experiencing FOMO, is that this is actually temporary.
Well, there's some great advice there, Veronica, and it's great to talk and get your sort of insightful breakdown on what is happening. And thank you so much for coming on to the Real Estate Podcast.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.